Hello and welcome to Flip the Script. This podcast is hosted by Life Fellowship Foursquare Church in Fort Morgan, Colorado. It comes from a series shared by Pastor Derek Brown in early 2024. Flip the Script focuses on the differences between the kingdom of man and the kingdom of God, or human nature versus God nature. In part 7, entitled, If No One, Then Everyone. In the Pixar movie The Incredibles, the villain's syndrome makes a statement. When everyone's super, no one will be. This statement is completely relevant to kingdom nature. When we realize all humans are equal and no humans are deserving of what Jesus has done for us, we realize that we are on an equal playing field. Nobody is better than anyone else. There is no hierarchy to the kingdom. If nobody deserves it, everybody deserves it. The challenge is simple. Put off our human ways of living and viewing others so that we can adopt God's ways of living and viewing others. Impossible alone, but the more we interact with God, the more He does the work for us, changing us from the inside out. We now invite you to enjoy this part 7 of Flip the Script. We're continuing our series, Flip the Script. We are looking at how God's ways of thinking differ from humanity's ways of thinking and how the kingdom works, the kingdom of God works differently than kingdoms of man. And all that is really just to say, well, it's here. God says it in Isaiah chapter 55, my thoughts are nothing like your thoughts, and my ways are far beyond anything you could imagine. Just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. So we're asking the question, if God's thinking and our thinking is so different, how do we adopt his thinking? And the answer is actually, it's like a yes and or a no but kind of a question. Like the answer to that question is really simple. It's in Romans chapter 12. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way that you think. That's the answer. How do we become more like God? How do we think like God thinks? We rub up on Jesus. He rewires the way that we think. We begin to think like him. Done deal. But we're going deeper in finding out what is the difference between human nature and kingdom nature. And so over the last 2 weeks, we've been looking at the Beatitudes. And I'm going to be honest, when I started getting into the Beatitudes discussion, I really thought that we were going to knock them out in a couple of weeks, that it was a list, we'd read through the list and be done. But that's not how it's working out. Because it turns out that we misunderstand a lot of things as a culture. And so one of those things is that we think the Beatitudes are like a list of things that you can write down and then check off and then be a good person after, or be a good Christian after, or be something after. And really they're not. The Beatitudes come out of a relationship with Jesus. They are the effect of having a relationship with him. The Beatitudes are things that Jesus pulls out of us when we spend time with him. Does that make sense? All right. And then because we live in the West, because we live in America, where Jesus has so influenced our culture, we think the Beatitudes are human nature. We think that there's something that we can just do. But that's only because Jesus has influenced the generations so aggressively that the Beatitudes are kind of part of our culture. But the reality is, when we really look at it, human nature, the Beatitudes are kingdom nature, and human nature differs from them greatly. So we're working through them, and we've learned and we've been learning that the Beatitudes aren't individual thoughts. Jesus spoke them as a single idea, a single thought in a single moment, in a single breath even. And so each one of these isn't a standalone statement. It is one that stacks on top of another that relates to one another. And so we're looking at them and we're having to build kind of a structure that starts on the first one, and then the second one comes in and is affected and powered by the previous. And then we keep going. So that's part of why this is taking so long. We've only been able to get through 2 a week. This week we're doing 3. We'll see how it goes. All right? And for those of you that are like, hey, Derek, you know what? The thing you wanted to do at New Year's, you're failing. I get it. I still want to try to be done by 11:30. That's still my goal. I've been doing better. I haven't let you guys out at noon yet. All right? But on Easter Sunday, it's going to be close to noon when I let you out, just because we're starting service a half hour later. So that's not my fault. I'm not responsible. I take no responsibility for that. Huh? It's your fault. No, it's your fault. It's your fault, Vanita, because 2 years ago when we did the first Easter brunch thing, we tried to have breakfast at 8:30 and start service at 10 o'clock. And at 10 o'clock, we weren't done cleaning up yet. And so Vanita stayed over for a half hour after worship started cleaning. And she said, oh, I wasn't able to go to the service. And we said, okay, we'll push service back a half hour for Vanita. Actually, I think it's a great idea. If we're going to do big family things, they take time, and so we'll make some more time for that. And it's a great deal. Our Easter breakfast brunch thing. Invite friends, invite family. It's a good time, and we'll still get you out of here in time to go eat your Easter turkey. Earlier this week, someone donated a turkey to the youth group, and they don't really have the time or space to cook it. So Pam and I took it home, and we're going to cook it for them. And I texted Alex. I said, do you want that turkey like pulled pork, or do you want it like Thanksgiving turkey? And she didn't answer because it was late at night when I texted her, and I didn't realize how late it was, and she was busy doing stuff, so she didn't answer. So the next night, I texted her, and I said, so microwaved then? It was the funniest thing I've texted in so long. I just laughed to myself and laughed. My family just thought I was dumb. Well, I'm the dad. That's what they think about dads, right? That's where we are. Dad jokes and stuff. We look, love us or hate us, we have a sense of humor that's all the same. Anyway, so for those of you that don't know, a few weeks ago, like at Thanksgiving-ish, Christmas-ish time, I was talking about how you can't microwave a turkey and have it come out good. But then I said Easter turkey instead of Thanksgiving turkey, and so it's been a running thing since, because that's a good thing. If I'm going to say something stupid and we're going to hang on to it, that's a good one. Let's hang on to that stupid thing. Anything seriously stupid, let's forget about that. All right, so moving on into today's part of the discussion. All right. So last week, as we were continuing our discussion through the Beatitudes, we talked about kind of the structure of what this looks like, okay? And we're going to read all the Beatitudes again in a minute. So if you're freaking out, what are the Beatitudes? They're just this thing that Jesus said, if you are this way, you are blessed in this way, okay? But essentially what happens is we meet Jesus and we start to recognize our need for him. And it's this interesting thing where we might come to Jesus and start a relationship with him before we know that we need him. And then we start to realize our need after. It's kind of like if you were, okay, have you ever been like out driving somewhere and you get home and you turn on the news and there was an accident? And if you had been, and you realize that if you had been 5 minutes later, or if you had hung a left instead of a right, you would have been in the middle of the wreck. You guys had some situations like that where it's like, oh shoot, if I had done something slightly different, I would have been there. Well, that's kind of what happens. We meet Jesus, and then as we start to understand the world differently and better, we realize how much we really need him. And so our need for him grows. That's the first beatitude. We recognize how much we need him. And then as our faith journey kind of continues, he begins to call out the gold that he placed within us, and we begin to realize how far humanity is from who we were designed to be, and it breaks our hearts because we have a relationship with Jesus, and we see those that don't. And we begin to have a desire to see the whole world saved and to see the whole world connected with Jesus and see the whole world ministered to, healed, right? And again, this is not because we're choosing to be holy or because we're choosing to be good people or whatever. It's because Jesus is changing the way that we think, all right? And then we begin to recognize that we're no better than those who are still lost. We see that we're all on an equal playing field. The only difference between me and an unsaved person is I happened to have an opportunity to connect with Jesus, and maybe they haven't. Maybe I made the choice and they didn't. But the difference between us on a sin level, even playing field. The difference between us on a humanity playing level, it's flat. I was working at a homeless vet shelter in Wyoming for a week or so. I was building beds for them. They'd had a bed bug outbreak and had to burn all the beds, so we were making new ones. And there was this group of vets out smoking, like they do, and it's what they did all day, because they weren't doing anything else. And so I went out and I said, do you guys mind if I ask you, What brought you here? And they all started telling me their stories. Unashamedly, they don't care. Some of them, they chose it because they want to be free. Some of them had addiction issues that led them to be homeless. Some of them had financial issues and family issues. And so they all had different reasons, but I realized that the difference between them and me was only a choice or two. The poorest people I've ever met in me, it almost feels like a roll of the dice that I'm not in their shoes. So we're quite equal. As humanity, we're quite equal. And when we realize that, we tend to balance the world on our need for salvation. And then we start working towards the salvation of those that we suddenly find ourselves caring about, right? Like before I met Jesus, I didn't care about anybody. Now I met Jesus, I'm spending time with him, and suddenly I care about everybody, and I don't know why. I was comfortable hating everyone equally. No, I don't play favorites. I've never played favorites. I hate everybody equally. But now I've come to Jesus and he's starting to rewire me, and that same energy that used to be spent just enjoying myself is suddenly being poured out onto the world around me. And I see value in people that I didn't see value in before. And I find my heart breaking for people that I didn't care about before. This is the effect of Jesus rewiring the way that we think. So, back at the top, we're going to work through the first four real fast. First, Matthew 5:3. God blesses those who are poor and realize their need for him. The kingdom of heaven is theirs. Okay? So remember, this is actual financial poorness. Okay? When it says, some verses, some translations say those who are poor in spirit. But if you look at the actual language, it's those who are poor. Okay, remember Jesus said that it's far harder for a rich person to make it into heaven than to put a camel through the eye of the needle. That idea is this, because those that are poor are well aware of their need. They're well aware that they need help, that they need to reach out of what they have because they know they don't have enough. Rich people generally can handle their own problems. They don't have to worry about where their next meal is coming from. They don't have to worry about the problems that the general population has to worry about. So when Jesus said this, and he was speaking to a group of people, he was speaking to a group of people that knew, because the way that Judaism is, that the poor are generally closer to God than the rich. So they're talking about a mindset and a heart set that realizes that we're all the same, and that I need Jesus. That's what it's talking about. So we meet Jesus, we recognize our need for him, and our faith journey begins. This is all the same stuff that we've talked about, but this isn't saying it's better for you to be poor. We're talking about having the heart of a person who is poor. A rich person can handle their own mess, but a poor person needs to reach out, and we all need to recognize our need for Jesus. We recognize that he is far greater than we are, that he is far more loving than we are, that his ways are not our ways, and that we need to adopt his ways, but we can't adopt his ways the way that we would adopt a new way to do a math problem. It has to start on the inside and work out. Matthew 5:4, God blesses those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Okay? Now, this mourning that we're talking about, again, isn't sadness. Okay? Everybody is sad, you lose a family member, everybody gets sad, and everybody gets comforted in that sense. That's not what this is talking about. Because again, we're in the same line of thought, the same structure, where we just learned that we need Jesus. And when we learn that we need Jesus and we recognize how much of our life was spent without him, and we see how much of the world is apart from Jesus, our heart starts to break and we become sad. We start to mourn the brokenness between man and God and man. The bridge between God and man was broken, and it breaks our heart. And we know that Jesus is the new bridge, and we want to see Jesus utilized for the rest of the world in the way that sounds way more sciencey than it needs to. I'm going to back up a hair. I need Jesus. You need Jesus. I want to see you have what I have. Okay. Matthew 5:5. God blesses those who are humble, for they will inherit the whole earth. This is where we begin to recognize that we're no better than the people that are still lost. And this is why we're having this conversation, okay? Now, the church I grew up in was an awesome church. The churches that I've worked at have been awesome churches. This church is amazing. So when I say what I'm about to say, I'm not talking about specific churches that I've been in. I'm talking about Christianity overarching, okay? We have failed here. God blesses those who are humble. Christians have historically elevated themselves above the lost. See, the lost are down there. They're trash. They're not even alive because Jesus hasn't brought them to life yet. They're down there. And maybe Jesus will choose to reach down and elevate them to make them like us. Now, maybe we didn't think that. Maybe we didn't say that out loud. But it's been a subconscious thread through just about every sermon I've heard since I was a little kid, every conference I've been to since I was a little kid. There was a subconscious thread that says the unsaved are not as good as the saved. But God blesses those who are humble. And when we talk about that humility within the context, Jesus is saying, first, we recognize that we need Jesus. We recognize that the world needs Jesus. And when we start talking about humility, we need to recognize that we're the same as them and we need to bring them on board. Okay, if you were in the middle of a shipwreck and you happened to be in a lifeboat, you wouldn't look down on the people in the water. You'd be panicked and reaching for them. Well, hopefully you wouldn't be panicked because that just leads to more problems. But you know what I mean. You guys get what I'm saying, right? I've told you guys what my uncle taught me about the difference between a reaction and a response, right? You guys remember that? A reaction is a gut move. It's nerve-based. It happens instantly, okay? So say you're in the kitchen and you bend over and you hit your head on something and you jerk your head back and you hit it on the top of the cabinet above you. You know what I'm talking about? I'm not going to stay out of that. I'm staying out of that. That's not nice. That's a reaction. But a response is controlled and thought out. So over time, we learn to respond to the world around us. We hit our head, we stop. Yeah, that hurt, but I am not going to jerk my head back because I know that I could hit on something else. I know that I could be hurt, right? When we're in a car, if the car starts to swerve, we don't react with a jerking motion and kill ourselves. We respond by turning into the whatever it's called, turning into the skid. So we don't panic, but we see the world needs Jesus. And so we thoughtfully begin to reach out to those that need Jesus because they're the same as we are. They're no different than I am. And again, Christianity as a whole has really kind of failed there because we so much, our behavior betrays us. Okay? Our behavior betrays our thoughts. Matthew 5:6, we continue. God blesses those who hunger and thirst. Now, remember last week I told you guys that we were going to, 2 weeks ago I said we're reading everything out of the NLT. This is why I like the NLT. These are the scholars that worked on it and how they worked on it and where they got all their stuff from, and this is why I love the NLT. And then we opened it up last week and I said the NLT is wrong. Because none of the translations have everything right, because English is weird. English is a headache. English is a pain. Oh! Because in the Bible, there are like 9 words for love. Between the Hebrew and the Greek, there are a ton of words for love that have different connotations and different meanings. And we have love. And you know what? I love my Skechers, but I also love my Prada backpack. And they're not the same thing. I love a cheeseburger, and I love my wife. English would have you believing that's the same thing. But it's not. I mean, have you had a cheeseburger? Love you. That was funny. Come on. She's glaring at me, but she doesn't mean it. All right. All right. No, so God blesses those who hunger and thirst for justice. But in the American mind, we see justice and we think violent justice. We think that person committed a crime, let's string them up. right? That's generally how we think. In current culture, we would say, that person did something wrong, we need to cancel them. We can never talk to them again, we can never hear from them again. They no longer get to have influence on culture and on humanity. That's kind of a human mindset, but that's not what this is talking about. The better translation for that is righteousness. And most translations say righteousness, but I felt like it was really important to point out where, even though I love the NLT, it's not always right, okay? So when we're looking at this, God blesses those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. We're not talking about what we have generally believed this to be. This isn't about going to court. This isn't about the rightness of us versus them. This is a continuation of the previous thought. We recognize our need for Jesus. We see that the rest of the world needs Jesus too. We realize that we're all the same. And if it was right and just, like we read about last week, I don't remember the verse at the moment. I think it's 2 Peter, maybe, chapter 1, verse 1. But if it was where he says that it was just and it was right for Jesus to save us. From Jesus' perspective, it was right and it was just for him to die on the cross for us, to rebuild the bridge between God and man. It was right for him to do that. It was justice for him to do that. Okay? As the father of my son, when he messes up, is it right for me to abandon him because he messed up? It is right for me to build a bridge and to teach him and train him and help him come back from where he fell to. That is justice, and that is what is right. So when we're talking about those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, we're not talking about standing up and telling people a list of sins that they need to stop doing. We're talking about striving for Jesus to be able to reach out and grab a hold of everyone the way that he grabbed a hold of us, and so that he can start changing them from the inside out, the same way he's changing us from the inside out. So the first four of these Beatitudes aren't internal. They're a little internal, but they're mostly about comparing me to the world and how I respond to the world. And we find, what we've seen here is that the more time we spend with Jesus, and as he pulls these things out of us, the more outward focused we become. Because human nature cares about me. Number one. Human nature cares about number one, but kingdom nature cares about everybody else. And Jesus exemplified that in everything that Mike said this morning. Jesus had every chance to say, no, I don't want to do this. I'm going to hurt. But instead he said, no, this is just and fair and right for me to save these people because I'm the only one that can. So, moving on into Matthew 5, verse 7, God blesses those who are merciful, for they will be shown mercy. This one is another tough one for us because human nature says, I deserve mercy. I'm a good person. I take care of people. I donate from time to time. I threw a cheeseburger at that homeless guy last week. This is reality. This is what people think. Okay? Human nature says, I'm a good person. I deserve mercy. But human nature also says, but I'm better than you, and you don't deserve mercy. It's not fair that I'm being held responsible for something that I've done, but you sure as heck need to be held responsible for something that you've done. That's human nature. Human nature is constantly placing me above those around me. Constantly. And we've talked about this at length, and we're going to continue to talk about it at length because the fact that it's in our DNA to be this way, we have to remember that we are the same, but by the grace of God. So, human nature says, I deserve mercy. Kingdom nature says, nobody deserves mercy, so everyone deserves mercy. You guys remember The Incredibles? Syndrome was a little bit right. Remember the bad guy? He said, I'm going to make everybody super, because when everybody's super, nobody will be. Because if everybody's special, nobody's special. Same sort of idea. Nobody deserves mercy. I don't deserve it. You don't deserve it. But because nobody deserves it, if Jesus is going to give it to one, then he wants to give it to all. Everyone deserves mercy because no one deserves it. You get what I'm saying? Like Jesus standing on his side of things, looking at humanity. He said, it is right and it is just that I die for them. We have this idea that we were falling into a pit of nothing and he reached out and barely caught us by the shirt. And then there was some kind of dramatic movie moment with violins and strings in the background and some orchestra like, ooh, big music. And he pulls us back and and we're slipping. And then the second hand comes down and grabs us by the collar and he jerks us out of the pit. And he barely saved us. But from Jesus' side, it wasn't a last minute thing. It was calm and calculated. And he did it willingly. He weighed the pros and cons of everything in the universe, and he said, it is right and it is just that I die for them. And I don't know about you, but that makes his gift so much more valuable to me. Because I wasn't an afterthought. And it wasn't an accident that he saved me. It's not like he was fishing and I happened to get caught in the net. You know? He chose it because he thought it was right to do. And that gives me value. So this whole discussion is this whole portion here. God blesses those who are merciful, for they should be shown mercy. It's very well told later on in Matthew chapter 18. I'm just going to read through it really fast. It's a story that we mostly all know, but if you haven't heard it, we're going to read through it real quick. This is Jesus speaking to disciples and whoever else happened to be around that day. He says, therefore, the kingdom of heaven can be compared to a king who decided to bring his accounts up to date with servants who had borrowed money from him. In the process, one of his debtors was brought in who owed millions of dollars. He couldn't pay, so his master ordered that he be sold along with his wife, his children, and everything he owned to pay the debt. Really quick. Remember, this is contractual servitude. It was part of the culture of Israel that if I can't pay my bills, instead of taking out a loan, I put my work into a loan type situation where my work, my life, my wife, my children, whatever, we all work until the debt is paid, okay? This was the culture. This is how it was built. So, where was I? Oh, yeah. So he ordered everyone be sold until they could pay the debt. Verse 26, but the man fell down before his master and begged him, please be patient with me and I will pay it all. Then his master was filled with pity for him, and he released him and forgave his debt. Forgave his debt. The man said, give me more time. The king said, you know what? Don't worry about it. Just forget it. You're free. That's a big deal. Okay? But when the man left the king, he went to a fellow servant who owed him a few $1,000s. He grabbed him by the throat and demanded instant payment. His fellow servant fell down before him and begged for a little more time. Be patient with me and I will pay it, he pleaded. But his creditor wouldn't wait. He had the man arrested and put in prison until the debt could be paid in full. Make you a little angry? Makes me a little angry. When some of the other servants saw this, they were very upset. They went to the king and told him everything that had happened. Then the king called the man he had forgiven and said, you evil servant, I forgave you that tremendous debt because you pleaded with me. Shouldn't you have mercy on your fellow servant just as I had mercy on you? Then the angry king sent the man to prison to be tortured until he had paid his entire debt. Jesus continues, that's what my heavenly Father will do to you if you refuse to forgive your brothers and sisters from your heart. That's hard to hear. Because our human nature wants so much to hold on to our hatred and the wrongs that have been done to us. It's as if when someone hurts us, hatred becomes part of our DNA and it just kind of keeps creeping back and it keeps creeping back. In Matthew chapter 6, verses 14 through 15, Jesus says, if you forgive those who sin against you, your heavenly Father will forgive you. But if you refuse to forgive others, your Father will not forgive your sins. Now, I have to say this every time because we're confused. We have to understand that forgiving someone Forgiving someone who has wronged you does not mean that you put yourself back in harm's way. Okay? If you were in an abuse situation that you separated yourself from, forgiving that person that abused you does not mean that you are going to put your life in their hands again. Absolutely not. That is not what we're talking about. Okay? What it means is that you're no longer giving that person and their actions control over you. Forgiving people allows you to walk in the freedom that you've been granted. See, forgiveness is this thing where if I've been forgiven so much, I have no right to hold on to hatred. But Derek, you don't know what was done to me. Derek, you don't know what they did. You don't know what they continue to do. No, I know humanity is really rough. I get it. I've been doing this job and various other jobs for a very long time. Okay? I had adopted siblings and foster siblings that had some of the worst stories you could hear. All right? I know what the world is like. But I can tell you that in my life, when I have chosen to forgive someone, they don't get to rule over me anymore. See, I realize that this person that hurt me and I are the same. And if I was in their shoes, I would do the same things that they did because I would have their history and I would have all the things that were done to them and I would behave the way that they do. So I can't say, if you were me, I would be better than you. I can't say that because we're the same. But I also know that trauma continues to hurt if we don't let it go. And we can't hold on to hatred and walk away at the same time. Again, this does not mean that we put ourselves in harm's way. I can forgive somebody from afar. I can forgive somebody and not even tell them. I had a pastor when I was a kid share this story about how he had hurt someone. There was a situation, this other guy was really, really upset. And a few weeks later or something like that, God spoke to my pastor friend and he said, you need to go and make this right. And so he went to apologize. He knocked on the guy's door and he went to apologize to him and the guy kicked him out, screaming, cursing, would not hear a word of it. And my pastor friend was like, God, why did you tell me to go and try to make this thing right? And God said, you did your part. You did your part. The person that hurt you might not apologize. They might not be sorry. Heck, they might still be doing it to other people. But as for you, okay, I had a friendship situation kind of break down a few years ago. And I'm not going to tell the whole story because it's too fresh for that. But the other day, or a few weeks ago, I was talking to a friend that was part of this situation, and I said, I wish for my part I had done things differently. And Pam got upset, and rightfully so, because it wasn't my fault. I didn't do anything wrong. This other person got very angry and very violent, and we had to break relationship with them. It was necessary that this separation happen. But I told my friend, as far as my behavior, I could have done better. I could have behaved better. The outcome might not have been any different. The outcome didn't need to be any different. The relationship needed to end. It ran its course, if you will. But I could have done better. It's kind of what we're talking about, okay? Unforgiveness robs us of the freedom Christ died for us to have. So why won't God forgive me? God can't forgive me. And I realize that's really, really difficult because some of us have been through really, really rough things by really, really bad people. But again, if we hold on to unforgiveness, we're allowing that person to hurt us again and again and again. Forgiveness just means I recognize that you're a broken human. I'm a broken human too. And while what you did was not okay, and I'm not going to allow you to do it anymore, I see that you're human. And I see that you need Jesus the same as I do. And I hope that you find him, and I hope that he's able to work in your life. Forgiveness is simply looking at someone and recognizing who they are and hoping that Jesus can work with them and work through them. So all of this discussion, from realizing our need for God to mourning humanity's lost state, desiring to see all people made right, recognizing that all deserve mercy, it leads us to this moment in Matthew 5:8. It says, God blesses those whose hearts are pure, for they will see God. Now, if we were supposed to choose the Beatitudes, wouldn't that one be first? Huh? Wouldn't it? If Jesus was saying, hey, you need to do the work, you need to change your life, you need to change your behavior, then you can come to me, wouldn't this be the first thing on the list? I think it would, but that's not what he's talking about, is it? Because everything here has been a progression from salvation to reaching out into the world. And if we continue that thought, what we're seeing is that as Jesus is pulling these emotions out of us and pulling this care out of us and changing the way that we see the world around us so that we care, all of that work that he's doing in rewiring our mind is cleansing our heart. Our hearts don't become pure because we choose it. Our hearts become pure because Jesus rewires us. And we stop caring so much about me and we start caring so much about the people around me. He cleans us from the inside out. Matthew 5:9. God blesses those who work for peace, for they will be called the children of God. Now, other versions say, blessed are the peacemakers. Matt, you want to bring that up? Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. I give you the Colt Peacemaker. This thing changed the world. I believe it was the first widely available repeating firearm of its kind, at least, and it changed the world. It made battle so much more deadly. And when I grew up, and I just read the Bible in English, and I just read the verse as a list, with each one being its own individual thought, that's what I thought. Those who make the world peaceful, those who violently make peace in the world, will be called the children of God. But I want you to consider something this morning. Is it really peace if everyone who disagrees with you is dead? Would we have real peace in this church if everyone who disagreed with me got kicked out? We wouldn't have a lot of people left. And the people that were here would be scared. That's not peace. I'm not going to say that battle is never the answer. I'm not going to say that we never need to fight. Ecclesiastes makes it very clear. For everything there's a season, a time for every activity under heaven. Turn, right? A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, time to harvest, time to kill, time to heal, time to tear down, time to build up, time to cry, time to laugh, time to grieve, time to dance, time to scatter stones, and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace, and a time to turn away, a time to search and a time to quit searching, a time to keep and a time to throw away. Some of you need to throw some stuff away. I've seen that TV show, Hoarders. Throw something out. All right. I have hoarding tendencies. I keep containers. It's a horrible thing. I've been throwing some out lately. I'm trying to be better. A time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be quiet and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, and a time for war and a time for peace. There is a time to battle. There are places in this world where war is necessary, okay? And I don't believe that will ever change. I would hope that as time goes on and Jesus permeates humanity more, that we're able to find peace in other ways more often. But the fact is, there are people in this world that will not stop unless they are stopped, okay? So All of that, okay, is true. But when Jesus spoke these words in the previous verse, Matt, if you could go back to that verse, okay, Matthew 5:9. I should have put it in there twice. Sorry about that. God blesses those who work for peace, for they will be called children of God. When Jesus spoke those words, it was in the same breath as everything else we've read. And he didn't go from, okay, first you need to recognize that you need me. Then you need to recognize that the people around you need me. Then you need to start helping them find me. Then you need to realize that we're all the same. Then you need to find the ones that don't believe like you and kill them. It's not how thought processes work. There's no way that Jesus meant that, standing there in that moment, speaking those things to that group of people. It's more likely that Jesus was talking about the fruit of the Spirit from Galatians 5. Those that pursue Jesus pursue peace. He's the Prince of Peace. The love of Jesus stops storms from raging. The man stood up in a boat and told the storm, stop, and it quit. And he might have been grumpy. They woke him up from a nap. He was asleep. They woke him up. He said, what do you guys want? It's a storm. Don't you realize you could just tell it to quit? And they're like, what, Jesus? And he's like, fine. Quit it. And he goes, I'm going back to bed. Again, I assume Jesus is more like me than he probably was, but still. Where Jesus goes, peace follows. And as we rub shoulders with him and spend time with him, and as he starts calling out his goodness in our lives, peace will follow. And we need to pursue peace. Again, with that friendship situation that broke down. I wish I had pursued peace. I wish that I had spoken to them. I wish that I had sat with them and said, this is how I feel. This is what we're doing. And even though we can't hang out anymore, we can't be friends anymore, I want you to know that I love you and I want you to find peace. I want you to find what Jesus has for you in your life. I wish I was that mature that day. Human nature creates peace through violence and conquest, but kingdom nature pursues peace because all of humanity stands on common ground. That friend of mine that I had to break a relationship with needs Jesus as much as I do. And I want to see him find the freedom that I've found in Jesus. I want to see him mature in Christ. Because I don't want to see other people treated the same way my family was. I want to see his family flourish. If I wished evil on him, I'd be wishing evil on his children. They don't deserve that. It's a very mature mindset that says, even though I don't agree with you, and even though you hurt me, I realize that we're human, and humans hurt each other. It's part of who we are, but Jesus is calling me to something different, and I want to see him call you to something different as well. So, as our closing challenge moment for today, I want to walk through this again, all right? Because it's a progression. We have to understand. First, we mourn the separation, first we recognize our need for God. That's the next one. There you go. We recognize our need for God. We realize that our need for God is greater than money. We realize that we cannot provide in this world what God can provide for us, and so we recognize that we need him. We recognize that, we mourn the separation between God and man, and our heart is moved toward action. I'm not just sad that the world doesn't know Jesus, but I'm moved to make a difference in it. Then we start to recognize that all of humanity stands on common ground. We realize that it's not them and me. It's not that I'm the saved one and they're separate or that I'm better than they are. I realize that we're all on the same ground. We all need Jesus. And so I need them to, I want them. This is the humility discussion, right? Then we begin to hunger and thirst for humanity to be made right with God. We no longer are sad over it. We're moved to action. We get involved. And we recognize that as God has been merciful to us, we must be merciful to those around us. If God forgave me, I can forgive you. if God forgave the things that I've done, at the very least, I can be of a position that I want God to work in your life too. I mentioned this a couple of years ago, but there was a point in my life where something clicked in my head, and I had this very unchristian thought. And I hold on to it. But my heart breaks for Satan. Don't love the guy, don't worship him. But my heart breaks for him because he had it all. He sat in the throne room with God. He worshiped him night and day. He knew God more intimately than anyone else. And he made some real bad choices that separated him from that. And my heart breaks. Because if he could be there, how much worse could I do? And everybody just wants to hate Satan all the time. And yeah, he's evil and he's going to tear you apart if you give him the chance. Sure. There's no question there. I'm not justifying anything that the guy's done or that he's going to do. That's not what this is about. This is about being in a place where I recognize God's goodness and how great he is and how sad it is when somebody falls away. And then that emotion follows to everyone. There's so many evil people in the world that we just want to see die and burn. And yeah, justice requires that some people maybe not continue living, all right? I get that. But when you look at someone who's super evil and you look at their life and you say, what happened in their life to make them be this way? Was it chemical imbalances? Was it mental health issues? Was it the way that they grew up? Were they abused as a child? And I think it's a very mature thing. Not to say that I'm very mature. I am very much not mature. But in this instance, I think it's a very mature thing to be able to look at someone who is evil and recognize their humanity, recognize that they need Jesus, and be moved in the same way that Jesus would be moved. Because when Jesus was getting ready to hang on that cross and he was looking forward into time and he was looking at all of the sins and he was taking on the weight of every sin ever committed, he wasn't looking at the kid who stole a candy bar from the grocery store. He wasn't looking at the person who struggled with obesity and overeating, gluttony, if you will. He wasn't looking so much at these things that we tend to focus on all the time. He was looking at the rapists and the murderers. And he was taking on the weight and the punishment of a rapist and a murderer. He was taking on the heat of all of the worst wrongs ever done. And his heart was moved for them. And he died so that those sins could be forgiven. And if Jesus can be moved that much, he's calling us to be moved more than we are, at least. So as we recognize that God's been merciful to us, we must be merciful to those around us. Then as our minds continue to shift, as God continues to change the way that we think and rewire us, our hearts become pure. We no longer strive after life the way that human nature dictates, but rather the way kingdom nature dictates. Our human nature takes control of us less often, and our kingdom nature takes control more often. We're less likely to start screaming when something bad happens and more likely to start praying. We're less likely to start freaking out when we get stressed out, and we're more likely to rest in God knowing that he has tomorrow in his hands. Our human nature takes second place to our kingdom nature. And now that God's heart is beating in our chest, as he's cleaned our heart and changed it to the point where his heart is now in ours, in our body. It's pumping our life. He moves us to create peace. And again, this is not because we choose to be Christ-like, but rather because Jesus has chosen to make us like him. And none of this is easy. But that's why it's not self-help. That's why it's not a list of self-help things. It's not 8 steps to being like Jesus. It's not. It's meeting with Jesus, spending time with him, and letting him change you from the inside out. So next week, we're going to conclude this with the rest of the Beatitudes section in Matthew. And like I said, for Palm Sunday and Easter, we're going to look at how Jesus loved and died for his enemies. But this week, I really want you to think about where your heart is in this discussion. Do you view those that aren't at church on a Sunday morning as less than? That's not even what makes you a Christian. There are people in this room that aren't saved. There are people not here that are saved. That's not what it is. Okay, so are you a person that looks down on the rest of the world because they haven't made the decisions you made? I had a youth kid many, many years ago that believed suicide was selfish. And anyone who struggled with suicidal thoughts was immediately beneath him. Because obviously you're just being selfish, that you're going to hurt the people around you in that way. It took a long time for his heart to change. For some, maybe it's I have my life financially in order, and I look down on those that don't. Yeah, when you got dollars, it's real easy to be that way. We're all the same. I want you to be challenged this week. I want you to say, God, have I been exemplifying you? Have I been living? Am I subconsciously thinking that I'm better than people? God, am I There's a Christian problem where we think, well, because I chose Jesus, you could have chose Jesus too, but you didn't choose Jesus, so you get what you deserve. But that's not kingdom nature. That's human nature. God, I pray this week that you would speak to us, that you would challenge us in these ways, that you would like, God, we know you're going to do this super lovingly, and that you're not the hatred-filled God that so many people think you are. We know that you come alongside of us and you draw yourself out of us. God, we were made in your image, and so you put the ability to be like you in every human being. And so we meet you and we spend time with Jesus. You draw that out of us, and we become what we behold. We become like Jesus as we see him, as we spend time with him. And God, I pray this week that you would speak to us, and that in your loving voice, you would just say, hey, we can work on this. Hey, you realize that you all are the same, right? And you can start to have this conversation with us, Jesus, in a way that opens up our hearts and opens up our minds, because we don't want to move into the future thinking that we're better than anybody else. We don't want to move into the future thinking that the wrongs that someone else did are somehow worse than the wrongs that I did, when, God, you've been very clear in your word that all wrongs are wrongs. God, we want to be better, and we want to experience your love in its fullness, and we want to express your love in its fullness. And we can't do that if we're thinking like humans do. God, we're called to be kings. You call us your children. You've adopted us into your family. Our past is no longer our past is yours. We're no longer rooted in the evils of our past. We're rooted in the victory of yours. So God, I pray that you would call out the greatness that you put into us. And that as you call the greatness out of us, we're able to call the greatness out of the world around us. Because God, as much as you love the individual, you don't just love the individual for the individual. You love the individual for the effect it's going to have on the people around them, so that you can share your love with everybody. God, we want to be on that team. We want to be a part of that process. God, we thank you for your love for us. We thank you for your patience for us. God, I thank you that even if we are not on this list at all, if we haven't started on this journey at all, your love for us isn't different. God, if we still struggle with forgiveness, or we still struggle with humility, or we still struggle with seeing the value in the people around us, God, your love for us doesn't change. God, I thank you that if my relationship with you never moves beyond I recognize my need for you, that your love for me doesn't change. Romans says that there's nothing in heaven or on earth or in hell below that can separate us from the love of God. So God, I thank you that you have patience with us, and that you are constantly calling us and drawing us to something more. God, you treat us with dignity when we don't treat each other with dignity. And that's amazing. God, we want to be more like you. Help us to do so. In your name we pray. Amen.